But you can't fool kids in Sunday school. They're too darn smart. If I sold my house and my car and I had a big garage sale and I gave all my money to the church, would I go to heaven? And I asked the kids that one time in Sunday school, and they said, no. Just like some of you were shaking your heads. You're all said, no. Well, I said, well, what if I cleaned the church every day? I prayed every day. I mowed the lawn. I picked up the weeds. I know Dan's not listening to this. I cleaned up the yard. I went to bought the groceries. I made the bed. Would I get into heaven? The answer again was no. And I said, well, then what does it take to get to heaven? And this 5-year-old little boy shouted out, you got to be dead. Good point there, right? Leave it to children. I want to tell you a little bit about the setting for today's message. Last Sunday, we talked about the feeding of the 5,000. And so after the end of the day, Jesus told his disciples, to get on the boat and start rowing across the Galilee, and he went up to pray. And as you heard in the scripture about the storm and everything was going on, but we think that this is really something that Jesus set them up for. He wanted to test their faith. Did they really have the strong enough faith to believe? So that's kind of the setting after that. So let's begin. It's 3:00 in the morning. The kind of dark you can't tell the water from the sky out there in the lake. And the disciples were out there in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, as you heard me say, and that wind was just blowing, and they were rowing, and they were rowing. You know how difficult it can be. You can just imagine it in your mind's eye. It wasn't a gentle breeze. No, this is a boom, boom. This is a big old wind blowing. The kind of wind that comes hard and cold and mean, that can sometimes turn a familiar lake into something you no longer recognize. And they were rowing, as I said, with everything they had. Their arms were getting tired. They were starting to get that burn in your muscle when you try so hard, and their hands were raw. And of course, Jesus wasn't in the boat. Now, have you ever lived along at the foot of Grand Mesa, as most of you all have? You know that wind. You know that wind that we get out of the southwest, and how it blows and blows, Dan's favorite friend. And you have watched, maybe on a clear afternoon, if you're up on the mesa, how the waves can start picking up on the lake. Some whitecaps, some things starting to get a little bit rough out there. And it's like the wind has someplace it needs to be. It's just blowing and blowing and making a big blower, if you will, of the water. And that's the night these men were having. Everything they trusted to hold them up was heaving underneath them. And I want you to notice something before we go on, that they did not wander out there by accident. As you heard me say, Jesus sent them. He told them to get in that boat. And of course, he knew the wind. Look at verse 22 in the reading for today. He sent them into that lake on purpose. This was not the disciples running from God, because he had This is what he told them to do. They were doing exactly what Jesus told them to do. And they still ended up in this terrible storm, and getting worn out. So let me say this to somebody today who may need this. The storm that you may be in your life, or that of a loved one, is not proof that you took a wrong turn. Sometimes the most faithful people, doing the most faithful thing that they can do, end up rowing against the wind at 3 a.m. And the whole time, from the mountain where he had gone to pray, Jesus saw them straining at the oars. He never lost sight of that boat. Matthew tells us it was the 4th watch of the night. That is somewhere between 3 and 6 o'clock in the morning. The loneliest stretch there is. The hours when the fears you keep you busy to feel all finally catch up with you. And that's right then, in that 4th watch, they see something moving towards them across the water, a figure walking on the waves. They're terrified. And Matthew, as you heard me read, does not clean it up for us. He says they cried out in fear because they thought they were seeing a ghost. These were grown men. They were fishermen. And they were screaming into the darkness of the night. And then a voice comes across the water, the most familiar voice to them. Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid. Hear what Jesus actually says there, because in Greek it's bigger than it sounds. The I is the egoema. It's the same phrase God spoke to Moses at the burning of the bush. I am. Jesus is not just saying, relax, it's only me. He's saying the great I am is walking towards you across the very thing you're most afraid of. The storm is trying to drown you in the floor underneath his feet. This is not the first time God met someone in the wind, as you heard Randy read in our first reading about a cave on the mountain where the prophet Elijah was hiding. He was worn out and so far down that he was begging God just to let me die. Just let me go. Then a great wind came up, strong enough to split the rocks, they say. But God's not in the wind. Then the ground shook as an earthquake. Then a fire. And God wasn't in either of those either. God comes to Elijah in the sound of silence, close and gentle, and asking one question. what are you doing here? And now out on this lake, God in the flesh does something even greater. He doesn't speak safely from the shore. He walks straight across the water to the boat to reach his people. And then Peter, you gotta love Peter. You gotta love Peter. Peter says, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you. Peter was always not sure. And Jesus says one word. He said, come. And Peter, this fisherman, who knows better than anyone else that a boat in deep water and that a man, so he decides, this is God. He told me to come. So he steps out of the boat. You heard me tell Loretta and Christy. And for a few holy seconds, he was walking in pure faith, walking. And suddenly, his faith dropped. He saw the storm. He saw the waves, and his human part of him took over, and he started to sink. Now, here's where the most of us embrace for the lesson. We expect Jesus to fold his arms and say, Peter, if you only had more faith, you wouldn't be sinking. We expect a scolding because that's what the world has expected us, trained us to expect. And when we fail, we're on our own until we fix it ourselves and prove that we deserve help. But look at what Matthew says. Peter cries out 3 words, Lord, save me. And Matthew says immediately, Jesus reached out his hand to him and caught him. There was no lecture. There was no scolding. No word said. But do you think Peter learned a lesson? Jesus was testing him, as I said earlier. This was all prearranged to teach Peter about how important it is to keep your faith, even in times of challenges. And friends, that's the whole gospel in one gesture. Jesus doesn't wait for you to stop sinking, or he reaches for you. He reaches for you in the sinking. You know, I've been a nurse for a long time, as you hear me talk about it, 56 years as of this year. Well, let me take you back to when I was a brand new nurse. Still not totally comfortable with my skills. You know, a new graduate, stuck on the night shift. As Ina probably knows how new nurses get stuck on the night shift. And I was working with this patient. He was going south, as we say. Vital signs were going, we were dropping, and began the labor breathing and the chain stroking. Most likely was going to occur. And this man was he was going. And I was like, oh my God, what do I do? I got to call the doctor. I got to do this. What do I do? I was like, clinically, cognitively, I understood the issues, but I could feel myself like uncomfortable with the skill and seeing this person starting to die on me. And that's when the cold water was really there. I was over my head. I was thinking. And then there's this older nurse, a woman. She'd been a nurse for 20-some years. And she, even, well, maybe a little over 20 years, before I was even born, she was a nurse. And she came to the bedside, and she sensed my panic. And she just laid her hand on my hand and steadied it. And she says, let's work together. Let's work together on saving this patient. So close that I felt then I wasn't alone. I had someone to help me. And I would love to tell you that the patient pulled through and we all walked out heroes at dawn. The truth is, I don't really remember how that night ended. What I remember all these years later is the incident of my lack of faith in my abilities. And it reminds me, obviously, of how important my faith is as a follower of Jesus. Keeping the faith, as they say. Maybe you came here this morning with your fourth watch going on in your mind. Maybe you've been rowing for months against a storm, against that wind that just won't stop. Maybe a diagnosis that you're worrying about, always worrying about the next test, what it's going to say. Or maybe it's a child that you're trying to recover back into your life. Or maybe it's a relationship that's broken and won't let you go back to sleep. Or maybe it's grief that you're still carrying with you. On Thursday, I think that was Thursday, August the 6th, was my son's birthday. It was a hard day because I always called him on his birthday. So I did something better. I prayed and talked to him with Jesus. Not the same as having him there, though. Some of you are tired. Your arms are burning, just like the rowing in that ship or that boat. And you feel like you're getting nowhere. Elijah, he knew that kind of tired. He's one of the bravest prophets in Israel, and he ended up in a cave. And sure, he was the only one left, and God didn't scold him for it. God fed him. He met him in the silence. He lifted him back to his feet. You know what? That same God is here right this moment with us. With all of our doubts and our fears and our worries and our joys and our happiness. And with our friends across the seas who are watching us. God is with you in your situation and where you are in your life. I'm thinking of one young man. I think he's online. He is in Uganda. And he is 25 years old. His mentor, his pastor, died. They have an orphanage. They have 20 kids. And his friends told him, oh, just let them go back to wherever. He said, no, God called me. This is a 25-year-old kid. Pardon, calling you a kid, brother. He's going to do whatever he can to make those kids have a life, a place of safety. And you know what? He reached us through our LGBT webpage. Uganda has the most stringent homosexual laws in the world. They can kill you for that. And he said, Pastor, I have young people who need God in their lives, but they're afraid. And these young children, he told me, they just took in another child because the stepfather was trying to rape her. They live on $1,000 a month at this orphanage, feeding all these kids, all going to school. I spent $100 and some last night eating sushi. Go figure, right? We're going to show Enjoy and Concerns another little video about another family that's rowing against the waves. You know, so hear me. The distance between us and the hand of Jesus is not the length of the lake. It's the length of 3 words. Lord, save me. That's all that Peter managed to get out. And that's what I tell my followers of Jesus in Pakistan and Uganda, in India, and other places of the world watching us today. Let God take your troubles. Turn them over to Him. God brought you to this congregation for some reason. Peter didn't have his life together. I don't have my life together. But God still loves me. He still reaches out. He's still there with us. So don't swim harder. That's not what saves you. Peter was not rescued because he suddenly became a stronger swimmer. He was rescued because he reached for the one who was already on the lake coming towards him. And here's the part I love the most. Matthew says Jesus caught Peter, and the 2 of them got into the boat together, and the wind stopped. Jesus didn't pull Peter up and leave him out there to tread water. I told you to be faithful. Let's get a little water in your lungs and see how you feel. Maybe you're going to be more faithful. No, he didn't do that. He walked him home. He got in the boat with him. And that is what he does. That's what our God does for each one of us. He walks with us. He's in the boat with us. He loves us just as we are. So this week, when the water comes up to your knees and the wind is loud in your ears and you're certain, I'm going to go under, I want you to hold on to one thing. Do not swim harder. Reach. His hand is already there. Amen.